My name is Betsy Reed, and I am the editor of the Intercept, a platform for the disclosure and continued reporting on the Snowden documents. We're founded by a bunch of journalists, including Glenn Greenwald, who had previously been at The Guardian, Jeremy Scahill, who is the author of several books, mostly about national security. I had actually worked with Jeremy on his previous journalism at The Nation, and also on his two books, Blackwater and Dirty Wars, all about sort of the way the U.S., in the first case, the private security industry, in the second, the way the U.S. is sort of prosecuting its global war on terrorism. And Laura Poitras. And Glenn and Laura, as is now well known, were the journalists chosen by Edward Snowden. You know, they did all of the initial articles about the National Security Agency and the GCHQ and its spying on Americans and people all over the world. And one of the reasons this came as such a shock is that the sort of mainstream journalism had not, gotten this story. It had sort of, there's a term of access journalism. There had been a method of reporting, most famously practiced by Judith Miller at the New York Times, highly reliant on official sources, some often unnamed, often anonymous, but that would essentially use a journalist in order to spread a narrative that is particularly favorable to the institutions, the government. The story of the founding of the Intercept really was about creating an outlet that would practice a different kind of journalism, that would cultivate a different kind of source, the unofficial source, the whistleblower. Often it is an institutional insider, someone with a great amount of knowledge, but who is disturbed about the practices, like Edward Snowden, but all the other Edward Snowdens out there that want to be sources for journalists. That was the sort of founding ethos of the Intercept. Glenn actually wrote in the past year about how, despite Judy Miller's downfall, how this form of journalism is still, her form is still very widespread in the US, the use of anonymous sources. And in particular, the way that this particular story is about how the New York Times published an article that was based on an anonymous source saying that Edward Snowden was responsible for the fact that terrorists have learned to use encryption. When in fact terrorists were using encryption well before Edward Snowden. But that kind of, perpetuated the official line that they were trying to have the public, view him more as a traitor than a hero. And then this was like repeated throughout. In this day and age, it just spread like wildfire across Twitter, and it just was sort of accepted as fact because it had been reported in the New York Times, citing an official, and without any, without the kind of questioning that you would expect to happen, especially since the paper did a major mea culpa after the Iraq War. So we still feel like it's definitely a problem, and it's something we want to take a different approach to. One way we express it is that we want to have access to the sources, but not through cozying up to power, developing those very comfortable relationships with official government spokespeople, and there is honestly a trade-off, because it's like sometimes we can't get comment from, government agencies unless we really have the goods and like they have no choice. It's tough sometimes for us to get a response. But we feel that's a sacrifice we're willing to make to do the kind of what we call adversarial journalism that we feel is as necessary as ever today. The Obama administration has basically, launched a war on whistleblowers and leakers. There are more prosecutions under the Espionage Act under Obama than under all previous administrations combined. These are sources for journalism, and it's being prosecuted under the Espionage Act, which I know most of you probably know that, but even now, even though I have heard it many times, it's worth kind of really concentrating your mind on that fact that it's that these are people who are being accused of spying on their country when in fact they're really trying to kind of serve the public interest through their journalism and through the whistleblowers are trying to get the truth out to the public. So this is a very it's very treacherous terrain for the source and for the journalist because of the high legal stakes that we face. So this is just one story we did about a case of Stephen Kim. He was a sort of mid-level State Department career bureaucrat, expert, very knowledgeable about North Korea, and extremely, actually, fairly conservative, hawkish on the subject, and was very concerned that, in fact, North Korea was kind of getting away with murder and was going to sort of escalate its nuclear program and that this sanctions regime that the UN and the US was supporting was not going to be effective. So that was his concern, was that the government wasn't doing enough. And he developed a relationship with a reporter at Fox News, James Rosen, and the story that resulted from that relationship is like what we call a nothing burger. It was not an interesting story in particular. It did rely on like a classified government document, but a lot of classified documents are not very interesting actually. The most interesting aspect is that they've been classified, so why is that? But anyway, what really was at issue was the fact that he had spoken to the reporter and that this document had gotten out before the government wanted it to. And he was prosecuted and he was sent to prison. He's out now, but it really, truly destroyed his life. And we did, a long profile of him and a short film called The Surrender, which is about his story. So one of the things that you learn if you scrutinize that story is that there was terrible OPSEC. Really, like the relationship between the reporter and the source was extremely sloppy. And in fact, the reporter tried a little bit. I mean, he came up with a code. I think it was like he sent an email to Stephen Kim that if you send me an email with 1 asterisk, it means we meet in person. 2 asterisks, that means we talk on the phone. Of course, as soon as the FBI launches investigation, it got the emails, right? So it knew what code they were using, and it was what we call terrible operational security, terrible digital hygiene. In this day and age now, we know, because of Edward Snowden, that you have to be really super careful about what you put in an email, and in the context of this government war on whistleblowers, you have to be even more careful. So we all use PGP encryption all the time, but we don't use that just for our sensitive communications, because that would draw undue attention to those communications. So it's part of built into our basic operations that we use it all the time. And then we also use this system called Secure Drop, which was developed by the Freedom of the Press Foundation. It's maintained by them, and it allows sources to submit documents without leaving a digital trail. So they can, contact. There's a whole how-to section on our website, how to lead to the Intercept, and they can submit a document, and actually there's an interface that allows us to communicate with the source, if necessary, back and forth, so that we can really, understand the documents, which is obviously extremely important. This has produced, some stories for us. We try not to always. I mean, we pretty rarely talk about it when we do get a story via secure drop, because we just feel like, that's information that, any information that anyone could use potentially against the source is not information we want to make public. But we did decide that in this case it was okay to talk about. And this was a case where we got a cache of documents from, it was actually a whole lot of records, 70 million phone records that came from a prison telecom database, which at first, we didn't quite know what to make of this. It was like 70 million phone records from prisoners. And then what we figured out was, we actually had our technologist write a script so he could do an analysis of these documents to show what proportion of the phone records actually were attorney-client communications, which should have been protected and privileged. And we ended up finding out, that tens of thousands fell into that category. So this company, which was a private contractor with the government to handle the prison phone system, and had promised that it would be 100% secure, and also that they would never record attorney-client privileged conversation, had violated all of those commitments, and so we did this story, this expose, and that was really only possible because we were able to get these phone records via secure drop. But the key thing is that this allows us to communicate with the source without putting that source at risk. I will add that you can contact the Intercept anonymously. I do always prefer that it not be anonymous, that there be a relationship between the reporter and the source, that where we know who that source is, we know what the motivation is. We may not, we may agree to keep that source anonymous, and then, we would independently verify the documents. But I think it's always better to know who you're dealing with, know what the agenda is, and then that can also help you kind of evaluate, the details of the documents. A lot of times the source is the one who can really make it comprehensible. So, we don't sort of fetishize anonymity, like to say that we don't even need to know who you are. That's fine. That's not our approach. We much prefer to have, a direct relationship that also is structured so that we can protect the source from any kind of repercussions. And we do actually, when we agree to quote an anonymous source, we only do so when we really believe that there's serious repercussions that we're protecting that source from. So that goes to the point I began with, that the way that anonymous sources have been sort of abused, and the way that the government officials sort of use the shield of anonymity to put forward their agenda, their sort of self-serving official agenda. The same thing could be true of any source, right? I mean, they all have an agenda in some way, and you just have to kind of figure out what that is, and does it jibe with your own journalistic mission and your idea of the public interest? So that's how we approach it. So the drone papers. This was a project involving most of our staff, maybe about half of our staff, over a period of 6 months. It was in a very intensive reporting project, which dealt with a cache of documents revealing things about the government's drone program that nobody had previously known. At that point, when we got the documents, very, very little was actually known, not only about the drone program itself, but the very legal rationale of that program. This is the kind of document that would be released by the government. This is an Office of Legal Counsel redacted document that pertains to the legal rationale of a drone strike. Basically, the implicit message from the Obama administration around drones was basically trust but don't verify. They would boast of the sort of surgical efficiency of the drone program, but not give any details or documents so that we could see exactly what's happening. And you have to keep in mind that during this period of time, the first drone strike outside of a declared war zone was in 2002. But it wasn't until May of 2013 that the White House released anything, any real information about what the procedures were, what this program was. And even then, it was extremely vague. And it said that the U.S. would only conduct a lethal strike outside of an area of active hostilities if a target represents a continuing imminent threat to U.S. persons. There's actually a pretty revealing quote from Admiral Dennis Blair that said that, about the drone program, it is the politically advantageous thing to do. It plays well domestically, and it is unpopular only in other countries. Any damage it does to the national interest only shows up in the long term. So this kind of program, it's unpopular in other countries because they can see, the damage and not just the, civilian casualties, but, just the psychological impact of having drones and the very sort of, chilling dimension of the fact that the entire world has essentially become a battlefield. So it's in that context that we received this cache of documents. We believe that it was incredibly important for the public to know who's making the decisions, who decides what a legitimate target is, and on what basis that decision is made. And the administration at that point hadn't answered really any of those questions. So the documents that we got really provide a sort of window into the inner workings of the drone program at a critical point in its evolution between 2011 and 2013. And just to give you a picture of what's going on then, when Obama took office in 2008, in Yemen, there had only been one drone strike. By 2012, there was one per week. And by 2015, 490 people had been killed in drone strikes in Yemen alone. So we have a very talented design team, and they, I think that they did a great job just coming up with the sort of haunting visuals that we used on the website. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but in this sort of media moment, I think that the design and techniques of presentation are really important to the impact of a story. That was just a background video that we had on the landing page of the whole series. So this is one of the key documents. It was actually pretty amazing to see this because we didn't know. We knew that Obama was signing off on this process generally. He had said various things about how it was ultimately his authority, but this really shows you exactly what the chain of command is, and we really didn't know that before. It shows that there's a two-part process of approval for any attack, developing a target to authorization of a target, and then there's authorizing to actioning. We know that it's intelligence personnel from JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, Task Force 484, which also had really operated in the shadows until we got these documents, which are basically all about its operations. They work in concert with other intelligence agencies to build the case for action against an individual, eventually generating what they call a baseball card on the target. Which ultimately then the president would approve. But what we actually found out was that the president does not approve every single strike, just every target, which means that there can be multiple strikes on a given target that the president doesn't get involved in that level of detail. So it's pretty important and fascinating to be able to see this laid out in this way. So to say a little bit about Task Force 44, I mean, essentially it's like the tip of the spear of the drone war in East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. And the slides, we had 2 sets of slides. They were focusing on the military's high-value targeting campaign in Somalia and Yemen between 2011 and 2013, and specifically on the operations of this unit, Task Force 44. You know, as I was saying, we work a lot with designers. We have Josh Begley is this brilliant data artist, and he came up with just this way of conveying all of the crazy terms, this sort of secretive world that has its own lexicon, and how sort of overwhelming it is, and chilling to actually to try to sort of decipher what these terms mean. And they're often like quite sanitized, like they are. Yeah. This is Josh also. So this is the documents we have were produced by this Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance Task Force, ISR Task Force. Now, what's interesting about the ISR Task Force is that essentially, it was overseen by this veteran of the CIA paramilitary operations, Michael Vickers, but its purposes, I mean, the ISR Task Force is lavishly funded. It has, hundreds of millions of dollars, and its entire mission, really, if you read between the lines, is just to get more money for its surveillance systems, for the tools that it needs to prosecute the drone war. So that's what you have to look at when you look at these documents, is how, what is the sort of subtext? What are they trying to achieve with these claims that they're making about the success or failure or frustrations of the drone war? This is essentially a lobby organization. It's an internal government agency, but that is lobbying for itself and for more resources for itself. So it has to be viewed in that light. This shows you, this is a little snapshot of one of the bases over time in Niger, I think it is, yeah. And how it sort of changed and grew, and how this has sort of reshaped the landscape of Africa because of the spread of all these bases. So that we have these ISR documents. Basically, they're kind of a very forensic overview and analysis of various different projects and campaigns within the drone program, and what went wrong, what went right from the military's own perspective. How is it doing? And one of the most interesting sets of slides has to do with Operation Haymaker in Afghanistan. And what's so amazing about this is that it was a case where if ever all the stars were going to align for the success of a military campaign using drones and special operations, it should have been in this case, because it had was the most elite U.S. special forces working with the CIA and NSA technologies and surveillance. They had human intelligence on the ground. They had signals intelligence, and they were targeting the remnants of Al Qaeda and Taliban in the mountains of northeastern Afghanistan. But what's incredible about the story that even the military tells is that essentially, even with all of these advantages, this was still basically a failed operation. Because the documents show that over a 5-month stretch of time, nearly 9 out of 10 targets or people who were killed by this operation were not the intended target. So they're not, we talked about the baseball cards before. They were not the individuals that were targeted by the campaign. They were other people. And they're all labeled EKIA, which is enemy killed in action. But what we found out is like the way that the military decides that it's EKIA is basically just that they're there, they're associated with the target, and they're military-age male. And then they get labeled EKIA unless something happens to come to light after the killing that somehow exonerates them and proves that they were innocent, an innocent civilian killed. Now, of course, there's no evidence that anybody has actually tried to bring anything to light to demonstrate that. So basically, it just goes uncontested. And the numbers that the military claims about who was killed, it's still, this wildly skewed perspective because of the way they make those judgments. So this shows you a little bit about how, first of all, it's got this very creepy sort of jokey tone, which is, we actually found out that a lot of these slides had been produced by IBM, so there's also this kind of weird corporate speak going on, but there is also this sort of oh, hey, this is lighthearted, and we're going to say, may I ask who's calling, please? That's signals intelligence. So it's just, it really is kind of a window into the culture that we're looking at. Just, for your information, IMINT, or IMINT is imagery intelligence. ABI is activity-based intelligence. SNA is social network analysis. IPB is intelligence preparation of the battle space. And F3EA is, F3 is actually stands for FFF, find, fix, finish, which is the sort of overall label for all these operations. And exploit, analyze is the process of sort of assessing what's been gained. And actually, one of the things that we found out through this process was that the Obama administration has been very clear that they wanted to change many things about the way the U.S. was conducting the war on terror, right? They wanted to, stop torture and close Guantanamo and all this. But actually, what seems to have happened is that they've decided it's kind of cleaner and easier just to eliminate, just to kill the target and not capture them. And even the military itself, in these documents, is acknowledging that there's a real intelligence cost to that approach because you can't get intelligence from, a dead person. So the other thing that they talked about a lot in these documents is what they called the tyranny of distance, which refers to a complaint that drone operations are hampered by the remote geographic locations of the targets. And they're really frustrated by the lack of full-time surveillance of targets in remote areas. And they don't have enough fuel to get their planes there and enough drones to conduct. What they really want is eyes on everybody all over the world in the most remote locations all the time. And they don't quite have that. So that's frustrating to them, and that hampers their ability. But what I thought was so incredible is that we're talking about, remote parts of Africa and just the incredible sort of hubris of that, wanting, the U.S. wanting to basically be able to place the entire planet, every corner of it, under surveillance. Otherwise, they consider it, just dark and mysterious and threatening. So they want, they want to blanket everything with surveillance. This is another slide of a drone base. The thing is, in Africa, some of the reporting we did was just about what it's like sort of on the ground in Africa and where these bases are cropping up, because it's all, extremely secretive, of course, and but it's really transformed. In Djibouti, I believe that the main base there, which is actually used to conduct operations both in Yemen and Somalia, is something like 600 acres, and there's a $1.2 billion expansion plan underway. This is a major, major footprint that the U.S. is developing in Africa with very little scrutiny. So that was the video that we actually produced this only for social media. We did not publish this on the site anywhere. And we thought really hard about how to have the most impact with the story. And it's tough because we're in a media environment where there's so much competition digitally for clicks. We're not sort of in that game. We're trying to do investigative work, but it's extremely important to us to have people read, our stories. So we thought really hard about, how we were going to get this to people. And one of the things we did was develop this video, which was really effective. I mean, it was shared, something like 60,000 times, and it drove millions of people to come to the site to see the stories in detail. We also, I don't know, this is how interesting this is to you guys, but we sometimes with a story like this, because we don't have the scale of a website like the Huffington Post, so we're not, like, our sort of daily traffic is nowhere near that large. So we made an arrangement with them to give them a chunk of our main piece in the series, and then they put a lot of links back to our site. And we had all the documents on our site. So our site remains like the repository of the story and where you get all the detail. But there are many, many sort of possible degrees of interaction that readers can have with the story. So they can maybe see it on the Huffington Post. They might see this video on their social media feed. And then if they're interested enough, they'll actually come to the site and really dig in and read. We ran 8 feature articles and then a bunch of data visualizations, some of the cool graphics you saw. It was really necessary to put a lot of thought into that aspect, not just the research and reporting around the documents, so that it didn't just sort of land with a thud, because it is hard, and especially I find, I think more and more there's a difficulty people have focusing on a subject that is not what everyone else is talking about at that minute. What do you do when you have, a huge story ready to publish on that same day? You don't publish it. You wait. It's kind of like, it drives us crazy because we're like, you know how it feels when you have a story, it's ready to go. You want to get it out there, but we have to kind of pull back and wait and really kind of, drop it when it really is going to have some impact. This is an aftermath of a strike in Yemen. Almost all drone strikes hit cars, so you see a lot of images like this. And just as a coda to all this, we came out with our story. Not a whole lot of politicians picked up on it, but the White House itself did promise greater transparency in its program. Very strategically, on the Friday, at 5 o'clock on the Friday before the July 4th weekend in the US, which is just the perfect time for a government to, it's so shameless, it's incredible that they actually, did that, but that's what they did. They released 3 pages claiming that there were between 64 and 116 civilians killed during the 2 terms of the Obama administration. And that's just a fraction of even the most conservative estimates on drone-related killings by reporters and researchers over the same period. There is different tallies, but the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, the Long War Journal, New America Foundation have, between 200 and 1,000 civilians killed by American drone strikes. And, possibly much more. I mean, the data we had on that Haymaker campaign, I mean, that was 9 out of 10 who were, EKIA and not the targeted individual. So, I mean, I think the numbers could well be much higher than anyone really knows at this point. And then we also recently came out with this book this spring, which compiles all of the articles from the drone papers, plus some previous work we've done on the watch listing system. There's a lot of documents included in the book, and pieces by Glenn Greenwald and others. We got a copy of a catalog that basically it's distributed to law enforcement agencies domestically. And it was shared with us by a source within the intelligence community who was concerned about, the militarization of law enforcement. And it's a secret internal U.S. government catalog of cell phone surveillance devices used by military and intelligence agencies, but it's being distributed to domestic law enforcement. So it's all about how all of these neat and cool surveillance tools that were developed for the military are being used by regular cops. And I think, we don't know, I mean, in many cases we were able to research and find out how these tools are being used, but sometimes, that was difficult to pin down. So we think, it's both a view of the current capacity of law enforcement and the potential future. These are just some of the tools. Again, if you want to, it's a pretty cool interactive that we have on our site. That really, so we took this catalog and then we visualized it. We used, all of the visuals come from the catalog, but it's just like this, hard copy catalog. So we had to do a lot of work to make it appeal and be interesting to readers. So what we did was we took each individual tool, and we included both what it said in the catalog, which is what the police are looking at. What is this capacity does this have? And then we also got people from the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the ACLU to do their reviews of each tool. So from this one, this is called a dirt box, I believe. And the review from the EFF researcher says, "Are you trying to monitor a huge political protest? Look no further than DRT. Nicknamed dirt boxes, these devices can locate up to 10,000 targets and can process multiple analog and digital wireless devices all at the same time. They're even capable of intercepting and recording digital voice data." This one is the Typhoon, and Nathan Wessler of the ACLU says, the NSA designed this little number itself, cutting out the usual corporate middleman. With an airborne broadcast range of 30 kilometers in rural areas and 5 kilometers in urban ones, the Typhoon is sure to capture data from thousands of bystanders' phones. And then this is the Blackfin, is also reviewed by Nathan Wessler, from the maker of Stingray. Stingray, most of these are very similar to the Stingray, which is the most well-known cell phone surveillance device. This is from the same maker as Stingray. It provides the added power to listen in on calls and read text messages. Also useful for kicking nearby phones off the network. You can choose between blocking a single target phone or scrambling the signals of all phones in the area. Take note, wiretapping calls and text messages requires a special super warrant signed by a judge. Playing around with the Blackfin without adequate court supervision can get you in a lot of trouble. And this costs $75,000. So this is just a video that we used to launch with the Snowden archive. there's a subset of documents that come from the internal newsletter of the NSA called SID Today. It's Signals Intelligence Newsletter. Over time, we believe that it's in the public interest to make these available to the public and to researchers and scholars. We didn't regard it as appropriate to simply, post them all online without going through a careful process of reporting, research, and redaction. So that's what we did. Starting like 2 months ago, we've been publishing these newsletters. Starting with 2003, we published 166 of the newsletters, and you can go and browse them and see what you find. We did 4 or 5 stories with the first release. We're journalists. We don't want to just post things for other journalists to write about. We want to do our own reporting and writing, and we do. But we also acknowledge that other people have a different context and knowledge that they can bring to the documents. So, we actually want to encourage other journalists to look at this document set and see what they find, because there may be stories that we missed. We always contact the NSA for comment. We let them look at what we're planning to publish. We let them make their arguments about, what is safe and what's not safe. So, and then we make our own judgment based on what we believe is in the public interest. This was the redacted version of Justice Department document that, or is it? It's FBI. It's FBI. Sorry. That refers to what kind of internal procedures are in place when they decide to investigate a journalist or a source of the leak. And it'd been very opaque before because of all the redactions, but we got a copy of this document that shows that, particularly using what they call the national security letter, they are able to just get 2, internal approvals in order to, pursue an investigation in the national security area. If it involves actually obtaining the phone records of a journalist, they have to get the sign-off of a DOJ official. But if not, if they're just going after the source, they don't need that sign-off. So it's super easy, and it's really chilling how easy it is. This we felt was something that was completely in the public interest to disclose. Yeah. So this is the last, and then this is just in closing. We have a story by Edward Snowden, also in. He wrote a piece that we published on the Intercept, and it's also it's the foreword to the assassination complex, in which he talks about whistleblowing and just reflecting on its importance in this day and age. He's been accused of all sorts of traitorous acts, but what really comes through here is the sense that that making this stuff public is actually about promoting good governance. It's about helping government function better, and I do believe that that more transparency is actually good for the government. It's not. A lot of the whistleblowers we work with don't want to undermine the government. They want to improve it and improve democracy, most important.